Hello, welcome to this podcast stroke blog from Gary and I. I'm Ian Hacon. I'm the founder and Chief Dorothy at Yellow Brick Road. You'll hear a little bit more about me later. Today, we're going to focus this podcast on finding out a lot more about Gary Burton. And what I'm going to do after I've just introduced him is we're going to have a bit of an interview to find out a little bit in a chat show style about what makes Gary tick and why he's doing what he's doing. And then over the coming weeks, we're going to unpack this conversation and start to use both of our mutual methodologies to help each other in our futures. So my background in well-being and giving people more energy, I'm going to be coaching Gary on that area. Gary's background in the 3 Ps, which he'll talk about later, around the way you think and how that affects your outcomes. And Gary's going to coach me on that. So we're going to have a mutual sort of coaching arrangement. So I hope you'll enjoy that and you'll sort of see both of our methodologies, how well they're going to work together, and also how much we're going to help each other during that process over the coming weeks. So that's it. So that's about it from me. I'm now going to ask Gary to just introduce himself.
Evening, Ian. My name's Gary Burton. I now run a coaching business called Principles for Performance. That is a coaching business that focuses on the link between performance and well-being and state of mind, basically, and looks at how our state of mind and how we turn up with our thinking affects everything that we do. And actually, what we do is focus on the fact that it looks like the world out there impacts how we feel and how we think, and therefore how we act and how we behave. But when you step back and reflect on it, it's actually an inside job. And there is a world out there of families and relationships and work and businesses and bosses and money and what's happened in the past and the future. And it looks like all those things come together and make us feel certain ways. But when you step back and reflect on it, you start to see that although there is a world out there, how we experience it from moment to moment, and therefore how we feel about it, is actually coming from us, internally, from our thinking moment to moment.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, so let's wind that back a little bit. How did you find yourself doing that? Let's go way back. Tell me your sort of story. Where did you start life? Where did you come from? What sort of upbringing did you have, and where did you end up with your career and family and that kind of stuff? Sure.
Well, as you might tell from my accent, I don't come from Norfolk originally. I'm not a Norfolk boy born and bred. I come from Essex, a town called Romford in Essex. And that's where I was born and brought up and spent the first 40 years of my life.
Up until last week then.
Yeah, I wish. Yeah, I actually moved up to Norfolk in 2000, but we're jumping ahead. So I had a normal upbringing. The first few years of my life, I was brought up on a council estate in a place called Harold Hill in Essex. My parents, like many parents, separated when I was about 11, so I went through all that sort of thing, which certainly isn't unusual, certainly in today's standards. Went to a comprehensive school in Romford, and as I got older, started to think of what I was going to do as a career. Like many people, I think, even kids of today, not really sure what I wanted to do. Started to stay on in the 6th form because that seemed like a good idea. Spent the first year having a great time, but then realised that I hadn't really done a lot. I hadn't really done a lot of studying, and the second year of my A-levels was going to take a bit of effort. So decided to give that up as a bad job and go out and get a job in the real world. Went into again, typical sort of thing that you do. Followed in my stepfather's footsteps. I went and got a job in electronics business, electronics company called Plessis, because that's what he did. And one thing that I learnt from a very early stage, when I was 17, I'll never forget it. I remember going in to work, and my mum was terrified when I first went to work, because I'd never done anything. I'd never had a Saturday job. I'd never done part-time work, done anything. So she was always terrified what would happen when I go out to work. But I just loved the environment I was in when I went to work, and I just enjoyed it from the beginning. But one of the early lessons I took, there was people in the business, in Plessis, that have been there 15, 20, 25, even 30 years, and used to spend every day of their life moaning about it, and would come in dead on the dot at 9 o'clock, where I would get in early and get some overtime in, and take every minute of their lunch hours and breaks, and leave at 5 o'clock when I'd work later because I wanted to earn money. But then they'd spend their time just moaning about what a crap place it was, and they didn't enjoy it, etc. And I could never understand that. And I used to remember having conversations with them. Well, why would you do that? Why would you spend 40 hours a week moaning about your life and how bad it was, and he couldn't wait to get home, etc. And they used to say things like, "Oh, it's all right for you. You're young. You don't understand," etc. And all that crap. So yeah, that was one of my first life lessons and I just didn't understand it. And I always thought to myself, I learned something from that if I'm going to spend a lot of time doing a job and a career, I want to enjoy it. And I learned from those people, and I spent 7 or 8 years and worked my way through that business to the point that I was running a whole production floor, and I enjoyed every minute of it. But I got to the point where people started to say, "Oh, you're doing great, Gary, but you're not old enough yet. You've got to wait till you progress," and that sort of thing. So that was at the point I decided I didn't want to be like the rest of the guys and spend the next 10, 15 years moaning about my lot. So I then answered an ad in the paper for like car owner driver, I think back then, nearly 30 years ago, earn £500 a week. It was a lot of money. No limitations on your earnings. I didn't know what it was. It turned out to be a sales job. So that's why I went. I went for the interview. There was a guy outside with a lovely red shiny BMW, nice suit. And he pitched me this ideal that in direct sales, didn't matter how old you was or what qualifications you had or anything, literally what you earned and got out of the business was what you put in. And that seemed like a great idea to me. So that's what I did. I give up my real job, as people looked at it then, and supposed security. I went and for a commission-only sales position, selling back then.
Commission only?
Commission only, yeah. That was selling back then. The first product I sold was kitchens, and obviously got the reaction that people do that from everybody else around them. You're mad. What are you doing? But then I forgot to say I was married by the time I was 19 and had 2 kids, so yeah, had a bit of a bearing on it. But I just loved the concept, and the thought of giving something up and so-called security never really occurred to me. I focused on the potential outcome of being able to earn whatever I wanted by the direct energy of what I put into the business, basically. Mm-hmm. And that's where I stayed in direct sales for the next nearly 30 years, moving through sales positions into management, and for most of that time ending up running direct sales and marketing businesses. Sell sizable business, multi-million pound businesses with 250, 300 salesmen and installation side to it, and 300 telemarketers and door canvassers. etc. So that's my background. That's where I've come from, and from that day, getting into that understanding that what you put into something is what you get out. That never left me. I always found that to be true, and the whole concept of what it means to leave a secure job just didn't make sense to me. I was always drawn to the potential of being able to get out of something what you put in.
So Gary, tell me kind of what was, throughout your career, what would you say was your biggest achievement? You know, what are you most proud of?
Well, there were lots of achievements, and obviously growing the businesses was up there with them, and to the point that we grew them into a group of businesses that we then floated on the AIM Stock Exchange in 2014 as a PLC. But even above that, which was sort of led me to the whole coaching thing anyway, was that the thing that I got the most out of was the bringing people through the business and the coaching and mentoring and training side, and basically bringing people into the business either on the marketing side or on the sales side, exactly as I'd come in, and showing them how that they can change their lives through the sales and marketing business, basically.
Yeah.
That same principle that whoever you are, wherever you come from, background, education, what you put in is what you get out of it, basically. So it was my fascination with the whole psychology behind that and what makes people tick, training, mentoring. That was the biggest thing I got out of it, and what kept me doing it for so long.
Yeah. And so that's so interesting, because I got some, obviously I was never in sales and marketing, but apart from I have to sell what I do now, but some international parallels there between you and I in terms of that draw towards the people and making them tick and development. I know that anytime we did any leadership development, wherever I was, certainly from when I owned my own business and when I was CEO, I want to be front and center of all of it. You know, I wanted to be, so it's kind of like you find you're sort of drawn to this stuff because it interests you, and you think, well, actually, and can get that. If I do that, help that person with that, I can see that outcome. Yeah. So some parallels there. So that then you discovered the principles from the three principles and what you now do. So tell me about that. So you, I think you told me before that you were still in your sales director role at that stage.
Yeah, I was MD of the businesses. Yeah. And yeah, like all the personal and business development I've ever done, I've been a great believer in, if I read something or I went on a course or I learnt something, if it impacted me, I've always believed in putting it into practice. For instance, I've had a property business for 10 years, and that came about from when I read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, and the whole idea of generating wealth through property. That impacted me so much. So I didn't think, oh, that's a cool idea, and that isn't that great, but that made me want to go out and do something with it. And from that, I built a small property business as well. So yeah, at the time, 2.5, 3 years ago, I was looking at, I really knew that I needed to evolve the business and develop the business, because direct sales as a sector has got a lot of problems and needed to change what it was doing and where it was going. So again, I read a book by a guy called Jamie Smart called Clarity, and it was all about this principle that how we experience everything, whether it be in business or our personal life, comes to us through our thinking, basically, and not from the other way round, from the outside in. It comes from the inside out. I'd always understood that the role of thought in everything that we do is so important, and that had a profound effect on everything I'd done over the last 20 odd years. But I'd always looked at it in the sort of realms of everything I'd ever seen before was down the sort of route of CBT or NLP or positive psychology that says, yeah, thought thought actually shapes your reality and your experience, but therefore you've got to do something about thought. You've got to control it or reframe it or change it. And this was totally different. This went in a different direction and said, yes, how you experience life comes to you through your thinking, but you don't actually have to control it. In fact, in itself, that's hard work and very difficult over a sustained period. But you just have to understand how it works. And that's I was deeply impacted by the book, and just like I've always done, I thought, well, let's do something with this rather than just say that's a cool idea. I looked Jamie Smart up online, saw that he did a 10-month coaching course, a weekend down in London over 10 months, and I signed myself up for it with the original intention of getting benefit of my own personal development and looking to potentially take it into the business. So that's how I came across these principles and the impact that they can have.
And how long ago was that?
That was probably now just over about 2.5 years ago, something like that.
What, you started the course?
Yeah, that I started the course, and it ran over 10 months. And during that time, it had a profound effect on me. It was also a time we was going through a lot of difficulties in the business.
Yeah.
We had compliance issues and what it was at the time we'd just gone on the stock exchange. We just listed as a PLC business, and what should have been the start of something great was actually a very trying time for the business. And my chief exec was your typical entrepreneur that didn't fit easily with the restrictions of working within a PLC business and everything that entails and demands it puts on it. So yeah, that's at a time when I was going through all that, this understanding had a massive positive impact on me.
Yeah, how did that help you reflect what was going on into your team?
Well, first of all, it made a huge difference to me and how I showed up in my business.
Yeah.
I'd always believed in working with people, mentoring and coaching them, but my style had always been pretty driven to the point of being aggressive. I suffered falls badly a lot of the time. I'd work with you, but if you didn't get it, what's wrong with you? In
the personality profile, you'd be typical a red profile, would you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is, usually in a sales environment that is one of the dominant personalities you might see in a sales environment, and not always, but
yeah. And over that period, I started to see things differently. The more I started to see how literally we shape our whole experience through wherever our thinking is in the moment, the more that I saw that people would naturally have different perspectives. And that made a huge difference. I tended to prejudge people far less. I became more tolerant and started to work with people harder, if that makes sense.
What would your team say about the Gary that had been on the course compared to the Gary that hadn't done principles?
Yeah, I got a few mentions of, is this some sort of cult or something? And yeah, because I before I could rear up very easily, I'd get stuck into somebody. But yeah, I changed the way that I started to manage and work with people, and they started to notice that.
They say a leopard can't change the spots, but
yeah,
teaching our dog new tricks and all that. But I personally disagree with. But it's interesting to see your real life case study where you've really done that.
Yeah, well, this understanding, if you follow it through, if your behaviour comes from however you're feeling, and how you're feeling is coming from your thought in the moment. If you change your thought, you change how you feel and how you act.
Yeah.
And what you previously looked at before as fixed beliefs that look very solid to you, this is the way I am, this is the way other people are. When you start to see that literally is thought, and that is fluid, and if you don't take that thought, there'll be a different one coming along in a moment. Things start to look a lot easier and a lot lighter for you. And I didn't recognise, if you'd have said to me that I had a certain level of stress and anxiety in my life and overwhelm before, I wouldn't have understood that. It wasn't until I started to feel things fall away and I started to show up in my business, in my personal life, with my family, with less on my mind, and therefore became more creative, more resilient because of that. That's what made the difference, basically.
And I guess that's the link that you talked about at the very beginning, about this linkage between the way you think and its impact on your well-being, because you mentioned that fairly early on. And that was the original spark of the conversation that you and I had when we first started talking a few months back. So talk about that link to the well-being. Well,
basically, your thinking will drive wherever your well-being is. There's two basic points behind it that all of our experience, 100% of our experience, comes from our thought in the moment. There is a world out there and stuff happens, and we have relationships and business and stuff that's happened in the past and the future. But literally how we experience it, that comes from us and our thought in the moment. And give you a couple of simple, we're living in it, so the examples are all round, but give you a couple of simple examples. If my partner, my girlfriend, says something, she'll say something to me one day and I will take umbrage to it, and we might have a row over something she said because of what I thought it meant, etc. She could say that exact same thing a couple of days later and I don't take no notice of it. She'd say it again in a week's time and I might even laugh at it. Yeah?
Yeah.
So it's, the more you look at it, the more you see it's not the external source that drives your experience. It's wherever your head is at in the moment.
I was listening to a debate on the TV this morning between two women about whether PMT exists. I'm not going to get into that debate. It's not my place. Two men debating that is probably a bad thing. But the one lady was trying to make this very point. She was a psychologist, and she was saying basically it's not, it's how we respond to a situation that affects the outcome, not what we're going through at the time.
Absolutely.
So that was a point she was making, and I'll leave that there because I'm going to dig myself out of that hole before I even get in there. But yeah. And I know. So winding on. So that was 2.5 years ago. You did the course. So what about 18 months ago? You took the decision to leave the company and start doing what you're doing.
Well, actually, and again, the whole process I've been through was influenced by the understanding that I was developing, and because that's another example to me. Making the decision to leave my existing business that I've been with for 20 odd years, I've been MD of the business for the last 8 or 9. Making my decision to leave that and deciding what I was going to do going forward weren't related. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that in itself was revelationary to me at the time, the way it occurred to me, because if I hadn't have been able to look at it like that, I could have well got stuck, because this whole thing of staying in the business because you don't know what to do next, or what's going to happen next if you leave it and you don't know what to do, you just got caught in a loop that way. Yeah. The two things just occurred to me separately. The fact that the business didn't feel right for me anymore, The fact that myself and the chief exec were going in different directions in where we thought we needed to take the business, that was just made sense to me to walk away from the business at that point. And then going back to the lesson that I'd learned all those years earlier at Plessy's, not to get stuck in an environment where you think this is no good, but still tolerate it.
That little voice popped up in your head.
Yeah. Just remember that. So, and just like the original decision all those years earlier to go into sales, not everybody within your family or around you sees it that way. I was fortunate enough, obviously, because of my career to have a bit of a safety net around me, but the idea of leaving the business and then deciding what shows up seemed very clear to me. So at the time I left the business, at that time I actually had no intention of necessarily thinking of coaching full time at that point. But what I did do, I had a couple of months off with the family during the summer, and during that time I went to a conference and saw a lady speak called Jacqueline Hollows that runs a social enterprise called Beyond Recovery that works with this understanding in prisons. And I was just blown away with what she talked about, the impact that it has. And she was reading a letter out from one of the inmates that had been on the program, whose life had been totally transformed. And the particular part that impacted me was when he talked about how he understood not only has his life changed and his life of his family, etc., even though the fact he was going to be in prison for a number of years still, one of the biggest impacts he saw was the way this would have changed the life of what he saw would have been his future victims. So the thought that there was people walking around out there that would never know their life had been changed. Just blew.
Profound, isn't it?
Oh, it literally. I mean, it sends shivers down my spine now when I think about it. And at the time, there was 750 people in the conference, and most of us were mesmerised. So yeah, I said, I emailed Jacqueline and said, I'd love to come and have a look at what you do and see if there's any way I can support you. She emailed me back and said, fine, love for you to come up. When it's not local, their prison's over in the Midlands, Rugby Way. So I went over there for a day and just loved the environment and the program she was running with using these principles, and the impact that it has on anybody. It doesn't matter whether you're sitting in a prison or sitting in a business or an individual or a housewife. If you're human, this can make a difference to you.
So Gary, tell me about the work you've been doing with Jacqueline Hollows at Beyond Recovery in prisons, because I think there's a really interesting sort of connection and how that transfers maybe into what we're doing with business leaders.
Yeah, it's fantastic work, and I really love it. And obviously, the connection is the very principles that we work with, that our understanding works from the inside out. How we experience everything around us comes from us, from the inside, from our state of mind in the moment, from our thinking in the moment, and not from outside of us, not from circumstances or environment. And obviously the amazing thing about working in the prisons is you'd be hard pressed to find a more extreme place to sort of test that, because the environment is extreme, the circumstances are extreme, and the very nature of whatever's happening outside, how you perceive it and how you feel about it is coming from within you, is really tested in that environment. And we work exactly the same way as we do in businesses or with individuals or wherever, that on two things, that 100% of our experience comes from our thinking in the moment and not from outside of us, from where we are or what's happening or what somebody else is doing or saying. And the more we see that, the more we see the role thought plays in everything that we do. The more we get in touch with the second point, and that's that our well-being and our mental health sits within us and not outside of us. And when people see those two things wherever they are, it makes a huge impact. But particularly in prison, where guys have obviously had a really difficult life. They've done some pretty bad things, obviously, to be there. And they suddenly start to see that those things and what they've done doesn't come from anything else other than where they are in their heads, basically. And when they start to get insight into that, everything can change. So substance misuse, alcoholism, mental health issues like PTSD, severe depression, where they're prone to violence, self-harming, all those things can start to fall away when they get an understanding of how they really work, basically.
That's interesting. So, specifically mentioned some sort of mental health issues there, because I've found on what we do, I've had one or two delegates come on and say, well, I've had mental health issues off and on all my life. I might as well give your program a go. And you kind of a little bit, I'm not clinical here. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. Am I qualified to help this person? And you kind of sort of go in and give it a go, and they get great outcomes from it. I guess you get the same experience.
Absolutely. And obviously the guys in prison have quite often gone for a lot of intervention, a lot of counselling, CBT, thinking skills programs, all sorts of things, counselling. But the thing that's different about all those interventions, and don't get me wrong, some of them can work effectively, but they all point towards the content of their issues and take them back into the problems. And how we work takes them in the opposite direction. It says that you're not broken, you don't need fixing. And when anybody hears that for the first time, it can make a huge difference. And
so is a sort of a point there that you're not defined by your past?
Yeah. In as much as you're not defined by the past, and you're certainly not defined by what you think the future is going to be. The only place that actually exists is the here and the now. All three of those can only be accessed through your thinking in the moment, but two of them are totally made up, and even the present is how you perceive it, is whatever thought is going through your head in that precise moment. And the more you start to get insight into that, the bigger the difference it can make. So with the guys in the prisons, it can make huge impact, and the transformations that you see, the way they change, their behaviour changes. And the crazy thing is, the whole understanding is based on that their experience comes from the inside out. But obviously, when their thinking starts to change, their behaviours and actions start to change, and then their outside world starts to change as well.
Yeah, and I know you can't be very specific about case studies here because you've got to protect the identity of your clients, but can you give me some examples of how that showed up without specifically naming anybody?
I can give you some overall understanding. Probably some of the most profound shifts that I've seen is some of the prisoners are on what they call IPP sentences. And those sentences are where they've got no fixed release date on when they can come out. They've been given a fixed tariff, but they've been judged to offer some threat to society. That was the idea of the IPP sentences in the first place, although they've now been taken out of existence. So
I've heard about those.
There's still some people in prison, 3,000 people, I think, in prison on them, although they've now actually banned them. But if you can imagine, that psychologically, that is a massive, have a massive impact on people, never knowing at what point they're going to be released. And we've worked with several guys that are on those sentences, and to see the change in them to be able to overcome that psychological barrier that they have, and be able to go on and become, even though they're in exactly the same position, they're still on the sentence, they still don't know when they're going to be let out. The changes within them when they become lighter and they see life differently, and they don't see that there's no point in continuing, which is a lot of them, the way a lot of them look at it on that sentence. That can be huge. And quite often I've seen it that, again, when you start to see how the world looks different from the inside out, then they start to act differently, and then it's based on their behaviours over a period of time. Then they can get in front of the parole board, and then they can get an outcome from that, basically. So yeah, I've seen big shifts in people, in guys that have then had a great result on being able to get out of prison because of the way that their behaviours change, basically.
Well, phenomenal. So they've, as a direct result of your intervention, they've gone from kind of almost a hopelessness state in a ever decreasing circle to getting in a position to get themselves on parole and get out.
Absolutely, yeah.
And some of them got out?
Yeah. One particular guy recently has been released. Many of the guys, obviously, they changed their outcome because of that, because of their. As soon as your behaviours and actions changes in prison, obviously it will lead to a different outcome, basically.
Yeah.
Which
is easy for us to compute on the outside and go, yeah, we'll just keep your nose clean, you get out quicker. But it's not so easy on the inside.
But when you're in jail, that's a different kettle of fish, basically, and it looks totally different, as it would to all of us when we're in that position. But when they learn to effectively not take their thoughts seriously, what their thoughts have been built up in such a certain way that looks like that's their reality. But the moment you start to see that your experience comes from thought, it gives you a lot more options. Whether you're in jail or outside of jail, whether you're in a business or you're a housewife or you're a college student, it works the same way.
Brilliant.
So yeah, that's an example of the profound impact. But it's
so in that environment, cascading that out between all of the people that you and that organisation have worked with, that could have a massive impact on not only their quality of life but society. It's going to get the system quicker, will drastically reduce their risk of reoffending.
Huge.
Big, obviously much safer place for the prison guards
environment.
Much safer place for the other prisoners to behave in, and it was that obviously you can't work with every prisoner in that prison, or can you?
You can over a period of time. It depends on how they focus on it, the funding you get. But Jacqueline has now worked with, over the period, I think it's something like 250, which is like a third of the prisoners.
Well, that's a lot, isn't it?
So
I was just wondering. The point of that point was really, if you haven't worked them yet, but you have worked with some of them, what impact is having on the ones you haven't worked with?
It does. There's a tipping point at which the environment starts to change, because if you get that many people changing the way that they look at things and the way the world looks to them and their experience, it starts to emanate into the environment, basically.
Yeah. I read some research before that, which I used, that just me smiling at you during this chat will have it's got a 15% secondary effect on your partner when you go back downstairs or through that at the end of this discussion, that because I smiled at you, that you're going to likely smile at them, and there's a 10% impact my smile has on the person that your partner sees next.
Yeah.
So, and you think that's just a smile, that's just the sort of science behind smiling.
Well, you imagine in that environment where literally, because typically when we work with this in a business environment, some of the ways it starts to manifest itself is people see how their experience is coming from thought. So it starts to show up in small ways. Like typically you might think twice before you say something to somebody, or you send a text or an email or something like that.
And that doesn't show itself, does it, straight away? Because actually, if you're the person that, I'm just thinking back to your career, actually, if you used to fire off, your staff would have been wary still for a while, because they think, when's Gary coming back?
Absolutely.
When am I going to get that hairdryer that he used to get? How far can I push this?
I remember one time when I came in the office, and you don't even realise it, the impact that it has. I came in the office one morning, was in a good frame of mind, and there was a delivery guy parked across my parking space. So didn't think twice about it. Just sat there. He came out. He actually went back. He said, "Sorry, pal, I've got to go back in." I said, "No problem." He went back in, came back out, and then drove off. And 5 minutes, I just pulled back in. I went upstairs to talk to my PA, and she was like having a fit. And she was saying, was he in your way? Was he in your way? Was he in your way? And I said, "Oh, not really." And I suddenly realised, I hadn't even thought about it, but I suddenly realised, I clocked on to, well, I would have reacted differently before.
Yeah, she was anticipating your reaction.
Yeah, exactly that. And I said, and we just laughed, and I said, was I that much of a dick before? and like, she smiled at me, because she's worked with me a long time, Chris, and she said, well, yeah.
well, there's one for your eulogy.
Yeah,
that's a tombstone statement, isn't it? Was I that much of a dick before?
Yeah. So and that's the way it starts. Like with that guy, it starts just getting a glimpse of an understanding over very small day-to-day stuff, and then just opens out, because you start to look at all aspects of your life and realise where it's all coming from.
Yeah.
And you can't control, we call it the principle of thought, because that is it. It's the gift that we experience life with. You've got no control of what thought pops up in your mind, because that's totally random, basically. But what you have got free will over is what ones you take notice of, and how much literally how seriously you take them. And you start to consider that and reflect on that, and the world starts to look and become a different place.
Excellent. Yeah, each time we talk about this, because obviously we're talking on air, as it were, here, but I know we've had a few discussions about it before. The more and more this is clicking with me in terms of because when we first met, I kind of I've done some mindset stuff. I've read some books on mindset. I've seen this stuff before. I even do a bit on it. I do a bit on it. Our program does include some good mindset stuff, but I'm understanding the subtle differences between the depth of your model and the way you work compared to some of the other models I've used. Not that they're not got a place, but they're different. They're more tactical. Things like reframing and some NLP and all of those things. I've used all of those things and do use all of those things. They've got a place, but this is different, isn't it? Very different.
Yeah.
Cool. I think in the interest of time for this interview, I think we probably should kind of wrap it up there. That's been really, really good, really interesting for me. So we'll kind of, unless you've got anything else to add, I need a killer last question, I suppose, don't I? I listen to Tim Ferriss's podcasts a lot, and he has this killer last question. I forget what it is now, but I can't be that killer, can it? But I should have a killer last question for you. But let's leave it there. So next week on this session, that Gary's going to flip this round and very much do the same for me, and ask me about about my life and where I've come from and what shaped me to end up what I'm doing now and what I'm doing now looks like. So I hope you've all enjoyed it. Thank you, Gary, for being so open and honest about your experiences. And we'll look forward to speaking and hearing from everybody again soon. If when you see this or hear this in whatever format you see it, wherever you see it, please do comment, share, like, follow, all of those things. If you really thought this was something that interests you and inspires you. Thank you very much.